Billionaire's blind mother had surrendered to silence. His solutions failed. Then, the maid's daughter saw her darkness and did the one thing no one expected. Her world had shrunk to a single chair in a castle of glass. Florence Beaumont, once a celebrated musician, was now a prisoner in her own body, living in total darkness. Her illness had extinguished the light, but it was despair that was winning her spirit. Her grand piano, like her mistress, sat silent and shrouded. Her billionaire son offered solutions in science, but she had already surrendered. She was a ghost in her own life. Then, one afternoon, a 10-year-old girl, the maid's daughter, stepped into the tomb and did the one thing no one else dared. The Beaumont mansion was a castle of glass, built on a cliff above the sea. But its queen, Florence Beaumont, lived in a world of total darkness. And the darkness was winning. The house perched on the cliffs of the Pacific coast, a monument of cold, modern design. Endless windows stared at the endless blue. Marble halls echoed with the sound of phantom footsteps. This was a house built to be seen, to be photographed, to be envied. It was not a house built to be a home. For Florence, it was a tomb. Once, these halls had rung with laughter. Once, her fingers had flown across the keys of the grand piano in the parlor, a celebrated musician whose touch was known across the world. Now, the piano sat in the corner, shrouded in a heavy dust cloth. It was as silent as its mistress. Her illness had come on slowly, then all at once. First, the colors faded. Then the shapes blurred. Then, the light itself was extinguished. But the blindness was only the beginning. The illness, rare and cruel, stole her energy, her balance, and finally, her will. She was trapped, a prisoner in her own body, in her own house, with only the sound of the ocean crashing far below for company. The waves were a heartbeat that never stopped, a constant reminder of the vast, living world she could no longer join. Florence sat in her chair in the parlor, a room she now knew only by sound and touch. She knew the chair was velvet. She knew the window was to her left. She knew the air smelled of salt and the expensive, faint lemon oil the staff used on the furniture. She was 82 years old. She felt 800. Her world had shrunk to this chair, to the feel of the blanket on her lap, to the sound of her own breathing. Life had become a waiting room, and she was just waiting for her name to be called. The staff moved through the mansion like mice. They were paid well. They were paid to be invisible. They spoke in whispers. They were careful not to disturb the heavy grief that hung in the air. They were, Florence knew, afraid of her. Afraid of her blindness. Afraid of her silence. Afraid of her despair. Her son, Nicholas Beaumont, was not afraid of her. But he was not afraid of anything. Nicholas ran his empire with ruthless efficiency. He was a man of steel and spreadsheets. He flew in twice a month on his private helicopter, landing on the pad near the cliff's edge. Florence heard the thud-thud-thud of the rotors. It was a Tuesday, 3 p.m. He was exactly on time. She heard his shoes. Hard, fast, expensive, clicking on the marble floor. He did not slow down as he approached. He never did. Mother. His voice was not cold. It was simply empty. A statement of fact. Nicholas. He kissed the air near her cheek. She could smell his cologne. Sharp, clean, and metallic. It smelled like money. How are you feeling? He asked. It was the same question he always asked. I am here, she replied. It was the same answer she always gave. He sighed. A short, impatient puff of air. I've spoken with the new specialists in Switzerland. They are working on a retinal implant. Experimental. But the data looks promising. I am having my team arrange a consultation. Florence turned her face toward the window she could not see. Nicholas, please. No more doctors. No more hope. It is not hope, Mother. It is science. It is a solution. He could not understand. He saw her blindness as a problem to be solved. A line on a balance sheet that was in the red. He thought he could fix her. He thought he could buy her sight back. He did not understand that the true sickness was not in her eyes. It was in her spirit. I am tired, she whispered. I just want to be left alone. That is the depression talking, he said, his voice crisp. Nurse Reyes informs me you are not finishing your meals. I am not hungry. You must eat to keep your strength up. For what? The question slipped out, sharper than she intended. For what, Nicholas? So I can sit in this chair for another year? So I can listen to the waves and remember what the sun looked like? Silence. She had done it again. She had made him uncomfortable. He was a man who solved problems. Her grief was not a problem he could solve. "I have a meeting," he said finally. "I will be back before dinner. Please, try to eat." His shoes clicked away. Fast. Hard. Leaving her alone again in the vast, echoing room. She let the tears come. They were silent. They were cold. They did not matter. She was a ghost in her own life. Later that afternoon, the house was quiet. The sun, she knew, must be setting. She could feel the temperature in the room begin to drop. Martha, the head maid, was working late. She was a good woman. Quiet. Diligent. Florence liked her because she never used that high, pitying voice that others did. Martha spoke to her normally. But today, Martha was not alone. Florence heard a faint sound from the hallway. A scuff. A small cough. "Sophie, I told you to stay in the kitchen," Martha whispered harshly from the hall. "I'm sorry, Mama. I finished my homework." The voice was small, but clear as a bell. A child. "Well, you sit there, and you do not move. And do not touch anything." "Yes, Mama." Florence listened. A 10-year-old girl. She tried to remember what 10 felt like. It felt like a different lifetime. A different world. She heard Martha's vacuum start up in the next room, a low, distant hum. The silence of the parlor returned. Then, a new sound. A tiny footstep on the marble threshold. Florence tensed. The staff knew the rules. Her son's rules. She was not to be disturbed. "Ma'am." The voice was the child's. "Sophie." Florence did not answer. Maybe the girl would go away. Another step. Closer. "Mrs. Beaumont, you should not be in here," Florence said. Her voice was rusty, like a hinge that had not been used. "I know. I'm sorry. My mama is finishing the carpets." The girl stopped, perhaps 10 feet away. Florence could feel her presence. A small, warm spot in the cold room. "I heard you," the girl said softly. "You heard what?" "Before. When your son was here. You sounded sad." Florence's hands gripped the arms of her chair. Such a simple, direct statement. No one else dared to speak of it. "We all get sad," Florence said, turning her head away. "Yes," the girl agreed. "My grandpa Walter used to say sadness is just a room you have to walk through. It's not a place to live." Florence was stunned by the words. My grandpa Walter. A war veteran, Martha had once mentioned. A man who had seen real hardship. "Your grandpa was a wise man," Florence said. "He said the dark is only scary if you forget what the light looks like," Sophie said. Florence felt a strange, sharp pang in her chest. She heard the girl move again. A small rustle. "I brought my book. I was reading it in the kitchen. I can read it out loud, if you want. So you're not alone in the quiet." Before Florence could say no, before she could send the child away and sink back into her familiar dark, the girl began to read. Her voice was not perfect. She was only 10, but it was steady. It was sure. "The Wind in the Willows," the girl announced. Chapter 1. The Riverbank. She began. The mole had been working very hard all the morning, spring cleaning his little home. Florence listened. She did not want to. She wanted to be left alone with her memories. But the child's voice was insistent. It was a thread of pure, clear sound in the muffled emptiness. Sophie read about the mole and his dark little house, and how he suddenly flung down his brush and bolted out of the house. Something up above was calling him. Sophie read about the sun, the warm grass, the rabbit holes. Florence sat perfectly still. The girl's voice was painting pictures. It was not like the audiobooks her son bought for her. Those were read by actors with perfect, booming voices. They felt false. This was real. This was a 10-year-old girl, with blonde hair, she guessed. Her name felt blonde, sitting on the floor of her marble tomb, reading a simple story. Sophie paused to turn a page. In the silence, Florence heard another sound. From the corner of the room, a single, soft, perfect note was played on the piano. A high G. It chimed in the air, hanging for a moment, bright and sudden. What was that? Florence asked, startled. It's the piano, Sophie said, her voice full of wonder. I just touched it. It's so dusty, but it still works. You should not touch that, Florence said, but her voice had no anger. It's beautiful, Sophie whispered. My grandpa Walter taught me how to play. On his old one. In the church basement. This 10-year-old child. This maid's daughter. She read books about finding the light. She played the piano. Florence felt something she had not felt in years. It was not hope. Hope was too big. Too dangerous. It was curiosity. It was a small, fragile warmth. Please, Florence whispered, the word surprising her. Keep reading. Sophie's voice started again, picking up the story of the mole who had left his dark home for the light. Florence listened. She did not turn her face to the window. She turned her face toward the sound of the child's voice. The final words of the chapter hung in the air. He was a maying, and a piping, and a singing. The parlor was completely still. The only sound was the distant hum of the vacuum, now switched off. Martha. Florence heard the sharp intake of breath from the doorway. She did not need to see to know the look on her maid's face. It would be a mask of pure terror. Sophie. Martha's voice was a choked whisper, vibrating with panic. What are you doing? Oh, goodness. Mrs. Beaumont, I am so sorry. I told her. She knows the rules. Martha was rushing forward. Florence heard the sound of her apron, the squeak of her sensible shoes on the marble. She was coming to snatch the child away, to restore the cold, proper order of the house. Mama, I was just reading. Sophie began. Get up. Now. Out. Go to the kitchen. Do not move. It's all right, Martha. Florence's voice cut through the panic. It was quiet, but it was firm. Martha stopped. Ma'am, the child was not bothering me. But, Mr. Nicholas, the rules. She touched the piano. Martha was stammering. This, Florence knew, was a woman terrified of losing her job. A job that paid for her daughter's food and clothes. I asked her to read. Florence lied. A small white lie. And I did not mind her touching the piano. She turned her head toward the sound of the girl's breathing. Sophie. Yes, ma'am. Will you be here tomorrow? With your mother? Yes, ma'am. After school. I would like to hear the next chapter. If you have time. The silence that followed was heavier than any she had ever heard in this house. It was the sound of a rule being broken. The sound of a pattern changing. I have time, Sophie said, her voice bright. Chapter 2 is very good. It's called The Open Road. Then I will see you tomorrow, Florence said. It was a strange phrase to use. See you. But for the first time, it felt true. Come, Sophie, Martha said, her voice still trembling. She grabbed her daughter's hand. And not another word. Florence listened to their footsteps retreat. The small, quick ones of the child. The heavier, worried steps of the mother. She sat alone. The room was empty again. The cold returned. But something was different. She was no longer just waiting. She was waiting for tomorrow. The next day, 3:30 p.m. arrived with a precision Florence had not felt in years. She had eaten a small lunch. She had asked Nurse Reyes to brush her hair. She had her put on the blue cashmere sweater, the one Nicholas's father had bought her decades ago in Scotland. She remembered the color. It was the color of a mountain lake. She sat in her chair, waiting. She heard the clock in the hall chime the half hour. She heard quiet steps. Martha and Sophie. Mrs. Beaumont, Martha said, her voice nervous. Leave her with me, Martha, Florence said. You may return for her when you are finished. Ma'am, I don't know if. It is fine. She will be safe with me. Florence smiled, a small, stiff movement of her lips. Or perhaps I will be safe with her. She heard Martha hesitate, then retreat. She's scared, Sophie said. Yes. She is afraid of my son. Is he a scary man? Florence thought about Nicholas. His crisp suits. His sharp voice. His impatience. He is not scary, Florence said. He is just busy. He does not like things he cannot organize. Oh, Sophie said. Grandpa Walter used to say you can't organize a human heart. That's why war is so messy. Florence marveled again at the girl. She pulled her worn book from her bag. The sound of the zipper was loud in the quiet room. Chapter 2. Sophie said, settling on the carpet. The Open Road. She began to read. It became their ritual. Every day, 3:30 p.m. Sophie read about the mole and the rat. She read about the river. She read about boat trips and picnics. Her voice filled the empty spaces of the parlor. It filled the empty spaces in Florence. The staff began to notice. First, it was Nurse Reyes. You ate all of your soup today, Mrs. Beaumont, she said, her voice laced with surprise. It was good soup, Florence replied. Then, the head of staff, Mr. Hemlock, a man as stiff and dry as his name. You requested the parlor curtains be opened, ma'am? He asked one afternoon. Yes, Mr. Hemlock. I want to feel the afternoon sun. She could not see the light, but she could feel its warmth on her skin. And when Sophie read, she could see it. Sophie, she said one day, interrupting the story. Yes, ma'am. When you read that part, about the golden afternoon, what do you see? Sophie paused. I see. I see the dust. You know, the little bits of dust floating in the air, and the sun hits them, and they look like tiny little stars, like gold glitter. And everything is very quiet, and the air is warm, like when you're under a big, heavy blanket. Florence nodded slowly. She could see it. The golden dust. The warm air. When I was a girl, Florence whispered, my father took me to a meadow. It was in June. The grass was so tall. I remember. I remember the smell of it. Sweet and dry. Like hay. Yes, exactly like hay. And I could hear the insects. A low, buzzing sound. Everywhere. The sound of summer, Sophie said. Yes. Florence smiled. The sound of summer. She had not recalled this memory in 30 years. The illness had covered everything in a thick, gray fog. Sophie's voice was the wind, and it was slowly, gently, blowing the fog away. Life began to come back to the room, piece by piece. Florence asked for flowers. What kind, ma'am? Mr. Hemlock asked, baffled by the new request. Freesias, Florence said. The white ones. They have a scent. I want to smell them. A large vase of white freesias was placed on a table near her chair. Their sharp, sweet perfume cut through the old smell of lemon oil and salt. She began to ask Sophie about her life. About school. About her mother. About Grandpa Walter. He was my mama's grandpa. Sophie explained one day, after finishing a chapter. He was in a big war. A long time ago. In France. A veteran, Florence said. Yes. He was very brave. He got a medal. But he was sad a lot, too. He said he saw too many things he couldn't forget. He's the one who gave me my name. Sophie. It means wisdom. It is a good name for you. He said wisdom isn't about being smart. He said it's about seeing what other people miss. What did he mean? He meant, like seeing that someone is sad, even when they're smiling, or knowing when to be quiet. He said most people are too busy talking to really see anything. Florence was quiet for a long time. This 10-year-old child understood more than her 50-year-old son. One afternoon, Sophie did not open her book. What is it? Florence asked. I was looking at your piano. Florence tensed. The piano. Her old friend. Her old enemy. It's covered up, Sophie said. Yes. Why? Because I cannot play it anymore. I cannot see the keys. You don't need to see the keys, Sophie said simply. It's not that simple. Grandpa Walter taught me to play. His hands were very shaky. From his sickness. He said his hands didn't always do what he told them. But he said the music wasn't in his hands. It was in his memory. He said, the song remembers, Sophie, even when you forget. Sophie's small feet patted across the room. Florence heard her touch the dust cloth. Can we take this off? Sophie asked. It's suffocating it. No. I can't. Please. It wants to breathe. Florence's heart was hammering. The piano was the last and most painful part of her old life. It was the symbol of everything she had lost. To uncover it would be to what? To admit defeat? To hope again? I will help you, Sophie said. She did not wait for an answer. Florence heard the sound of the heavy cloth being pulled. She heard it slide along the polished wood and fall to the floor in a heavy heap. Dust filled the air. Florence coughed. It's so beautiful, Sophie whispered. A grand. It's so big. Silence. Then a sound. Sophie's small fingers. She played a C major scale. Simple. Clear. The notes rang out, pure and true. They had been sleeping, waiting. The sound was like a key, turning a lock deep inside Florence. It sounds bright, Sophie said. It is a Steinway, Florence whispered. From Hamburg. 1958. You played it a lot. It wasn't a question. Every day? For 50 years. Sophie played another chord. Then another. She was not a virtuoso, not like Florence had been. She was a child. She played simple, blocky chords. A hymn, perhaps. What is that? Florence asked. Amazing Grace, Sophie replied. Grandpa Walter's favorite. Sophie played the simple melody. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. The irony was so thick, so heavy, it should have been cruel. But it was not. It was gentle. The tears that came to Florence's eyes were not the cold, despairing tears of her grief. They were hot. They were stinging. They were alive. Your turn, Sophie said. No, I cannot. My hands, they are stiff. I have forgotten. The song remembers, Sophie said again, her voice soft. Just touch it. It missed you. She heard the small girl cross the room to her. She felt a small, warm hand take her own. Sophie's hand was slightly sticky, probably from an after-school snack. It was the first hand that had touched her in kindness, not in clinical duty, in years. Come on, Sophie urged. Florence let herself be pulled. She stood up from her chair, her legs trembling. She used her cane with one hand and held Sophie's with the other. She took 3, 4, 5 steps. Her shin bumped against the hard, carved leg of the piano bench. Sit down, Sophie said. Florence sat. She was facing the keyboard. She could feel it in front of her. A void. 88 keys she could not see. Where? She whispered. Sophie took Florence's right hand. She placed it. This is middle C, she said, putting Florence's thumb on the key. Florence's finger touched the ivory. It was cool, smooth. She pressed down. A single note. The heart of the piano. She let it ring until it faded into nothing. Then, her hand, moving from a memory buried deeper than bone, found the other keys. C, E, G. A chord. Simple. Broken. But it was there. She played it again. And again. Sophie was quiet beside her. Florence Beaumont, the celebrated pianist, was playing again. It was not a concerto. It was not a sonata. It was a single, broken chord. But it was everything. Florence's hand rested on the keys. Her fingers felt like old, stiff wood. They did not want to bend. I can't, she whispered. The frustration was immediate. The memory of her skill was a curse. It was like remembering how to fly when your wings were broken. You already did, Sophie said. You played a chord. One chord. By accident. Grandpa Walter said there are no accidents. He said that's just the world telling you to pay attention. Florence took a shaky breath. The smell of the old wood, the faint metallic tang of the strings, the perfume of the freesias in the room. It was all mixing together. She placed her left hand on the keys. She fumbled, her pinky striking 2 notes at once. A ugly, flat sound. She flinched, pulling her hands back to her lap. It's no use. It's gone. I'm just a blind old woman playing at a life I used to have. Sophie was quiet. Florence felt the small girl shift on the bench beside her. Do you know Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? Sophie asked. Florence was so taken aback, she almost laughed. What? Twinkle, Twinkle. I know that one. I can play it. My dear, Florence said. I used to play Rachmaninoff. I used to play Chopin's Etudes. I don't know them, Sophie said simply. But I know this one. It's a good song. Grandpa Walter said simple songs are sometimes the strongest, because more people can sing them. Sophie placed her small fingers on the keys. She plunked out the melody. It was slow. It was hesitant. She was a beginner. But the piano didn't care. It was a Steinway. It made every note, even a child's, sound like a diamond. You try, Sophie said. Florence sighed. But she put her hand back. She found the C. Her thumb felt for it, found the familiar shape of the black keys, and settled just below. She played the note. C. Then again. C. Then her ring finger, stretching. G again. G. Her index finger, A. Again. A. Back to G. It was the simplest melody on earth. And her hand ached from the effort. It was clumsy. It was halting. But it was music. She finished the line. She stopped. Her hand was trembling. You did it, Sophie whispered, as if she had just watched a mountain move. Florence's eyes, blind and useless, were brimming with hot tears. She had not played a melody in 5 years. It remembers, she whispered, echoing the girl's words. See, Sophie said, satisfied. I told you. That afternoon, they did not read. Florence stayed at the piano. She played the melody again. And again, her fingers grew slightly more confident. They began to move, searching for the chords that went underneath. Her left hand found a simple harmony. When Martha came to the door an hour later, she stopped dead. She was not just seeing her employer out of her chair. She was not just seeing the piano uncovered. She was hearing music. It was soft. It was simple. But it was music. And it was coming from the mistress of the house. Florence, lost in the sound, did not hear her. Mrs. Beaumont, Martha said, her voice trembling. Florence startled, her hands dropping. Oh, Martha, it is that time already. Yes, ma'am. Martha stepped into the room. She was looking from the piano, to her daughter, to the old woman. She saw the tear tracks on Florence's powdered cheek. Ma'am, are you all right? Florence turned her face toward the sound of Martha's voice. And for the first time in years, she smiled. It was not the stiff grimace of politeness. It was a real, watery, broken smile. "I am more than all right, Martha," she said. Her voice was stronger than it had been all year. "Your daughter is a miracle." Martha looked at Sophie, who was swinging her legs on the piano bench. "Her child. A miracle." "Thank you, Sophie," Florence said. "Tomorrow, we will try the next song." The house changed. It was not a sudden change, but a slow, steady tide. The staff heard it first. The whispers in the hall were no longer just about Mr. Nicholas's moods. They were about Mrs. Beaumont. "Did you hear her?" one of the younger maids asked. She was laughing. A real laugh. "And she asked for the lemon cake from the kitchen," Mr. Hemlock told the chef. "She has not asked for a sweet in 2 years." The 3:30 ritual was now sacred. It began with the reading. Sophie had finished The Wind in the Willows and, after much discussion, they had chosen The Secret Garden. "It's about a garden that's locked up," Sophie explained. "And a boy who can't walk. And a girl who is very sour." "That sounds wonderful," Florence said. Sophie's voice would fill the room, painting pictures of stone walls and buried keys. Then, they would go to the piano. Florence's hands were slowly, painfully, coming back to life. She was not playing Chopin. She was playing hymns. She was playing old folk songs. She was playing the simple pieces she had been taught as a child, long before she was a star. Her memory, it turned out, was perfect. Her fingers were the problem. "They are so stiff," she would complain. "You have to stretch them," Sophie said, with the authority of a 10-year-old. "Like this." She would show Florence her own simple finger stretches. "It is arthritis, my dear. It does not simply go away." "That's okay," Sophie said. "You just have to be nice to it." Grandpa Walter's hands were shaky. He said he didn't fight them. He just invited them to the party. Sometimes they showed up. Sometimes they didn't. Florence began to see the world through Sophie. She was reclaiming her own senses by borrowing the girls. "What do you see outside today, Sophie?" she would ask. Sophie would press her nose to the giant window. "It's gray, but a nice gray. The clouds are very low. They look like a big, soft blanket. And the ocean is angry. It's all white foam. It's very loud." Florence would nod. A good day to be inside. With a story. She was alive again. The blindness was still there. The illness still made her weak. But the despair, the heavy, suffocating fog, it was lifting. She was the garden, locked behind a stone wall. And this child, with her simple stories and her grandfather's wisdom, had found the key. And then, it was Tuesday, 3 p.m. Florence was sitting in her velvet chair. She was not waiting for the helicopter. She was anticipating it. She heard the thud, thud, thud of the rotors. The sound was a hammer, beating against the new, fragile piece of the house. She heard his shoes. Hard. Fast. Clicking on the marble. "Mother." "Nicholas." He came in. He stopped. Florence could feel him stop. The air in the room changed. It went from calm to electric. "What?" he said, his voice flat and dangerous, "is going on here?" "Good afternoon, Nicholas. It is good of you to visit. The curtains are open. The sun it's blinding." He strode across the room. Florence heard the harsh sound of the electronic curtains being closed. The warmth on her face vanished. "I like the sun," she said quietly. "It is too bright." And he stopped again. "The piano. Why is that dust cloth on the floor?" "I have been practicing," Florence said. Nicholas was silent. She could feel his eyes on her. She knew that look. It was the same look he gave a business rival who had presented a foolish idea. "Practicing." He said the word as if it tasted foul. "Mother, you cannot see. You have not played in 5 years. Your hands are stiff," Florence finished for him. "Yes, but they are getting better. A little every day. He was searching for a word. "This is not healthy. This is delusional. Who put you up to this? Was it the nurse? I'll have her fired." It was not the nurse. Just then, the clock in the hall chimed 3:30. Right on cue, Florence heard small, light footsteps. Sophie appeared in the doorway. She was holding her new book, The Secret Garden. She stopped when she saw Nicholas. He was a tall, severe man in a dark suit. He looked like a shadow that had taken human form. But Sophie was not Martha. She was not paid to be afraid. She smiled politely. "Hello. You must be Mr. Beaumont." She walked past him, giving him a wide berth, and went straight to Florence's side. "I'm here, Mrs. Beaumont," she said, her voice clear. "I'm sorry I'm a minute late. Mrs. Gable kept us after for math." Nicholas watched this. His face was a mask of cold disbelief. "Mother," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Who is this child?" "This is Sophie," Florence said. She reached out her hand, and Sophie took it. "She is Martha's daughter. She is my friend." "Martha's daughter," Nicholas repeated. He looked at Sophie as if she were a strange insect. "The maid's child." He turned back to Florence. "You are letting a maid's child play games with you? This is what this is. This is why the piano is uncovered? You are playing tea party with the staff's children." The contempt in his voice was a physical blow. "Nicholas, you do not understand," Florence said, her voice pleading. "This child, she has what? What has she done? Filled your head with nonsense? Given you false hope? Look at you. You are blind. You are ill. You cannot play the piano. This is a circus. It is undignified. She reads to me," Florence said, her hand tightening on Sophie's. "We have audiobooks for that. I pay for the best subscriptions." "It is not the same," Florence cried out, her voice cracking. "Don't you understand? It is not the same. Her voice, it helps me see." "That is the most absurd thing I have ever heard," Nicholas said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It stops. Today." "No." Nicholas froze. His mother had not used that tone with him in a decade. "What did you say?" "I said no. Sophie will continue to come. I will continue to listen. And I will continue to play my piano." Nicholas's face hardened. He was no longer a son. He was a CEO. This was an insubordination. "The girl is a distraction," he said, his voice like ice. "You are clinging to fantasies. It is unhealthy. It is delaying you from focusing on real solutions. Like the Swiss clinic." He turned to Sophie. He was a terrifying, towering man. Sophie, to her credit, did not flinch. She just stared back at him. Her eyes, Florence knew, must be very clear. "You," he said to her, pointing a finger. "Your mother's employment here is conditional. This visiting is over. You will go to the kitchen, and you will not come back to this room. Do you understand me?" Sophie looked at him. She looked at his expensive suit, his gold watch, his angry, pinched face. Then she turned to Florence. She saw the old woman's face, pale, terrified, her hand trembling. Sophie made a choice. "No, sir," she said, her voice small, but perfectly steady. "I do not understand. You are being very rude to your mother." Nicholas was so shocked, he was speechless. "Mrs. Beaumont," Sophie said, ignoring the man. "Should I start with chapter 4? Florence looked from the sound of her son's furious breathing to the feel of the child's small, brave hand. "Yes, Sophie," she whispered. "Please, read." "This is unacceptable," Nicholas roared. "I will not be." Sophie's voice, clear and strong, cut through his. "The sun was shining," she began, "inside the 4 high walls of the secret garden." Nicholas Beaumont did not move for a full 10 seconds. He stared at the 10-year-old child who had just begun to read. He stared at his mother, who was listening to her. The fury that came over him was cold. It was the absolute, precise rage of a man whose world order had been violated. He did not yell again. Yelling was a loss of control. He retook control. "Stop," he said. The word was not loud. It was a stiletto. Sophie's voice faltered and stopped. Nicholas did not look at his mother. He did not look at the child. He walked to the wall-mounted intercom, his steps perfectly measured. He pressed the button. "Mr. Hemlock." The butler's voice was immediate, tinny from the speaker. "Yes, Mr. Beaumont. Bring Martha to the parlor. Now." "Sir, she is in the middle of." "Now." He released the button. The connection cut with a sharp click. Florence's hand flew to her own throat. She was trembling. "Nicholas, whatever you are planning, do not. This is between you and me. The child, Martha, they have done nothing. They have done this," Nicholas said, gesturing to the open curtains, the uncovered piano, the open book. "They have indulged this fantasy. It is an infection. I am removing it." "You are a cruel man," Florence whispered. "I am a realist, mother. I am trying to save your life while you are content to be entertained in a sandbox." Heavy, rushing footsteps approached. Martha. She must have run from the kitchens. She appeared in the doorway, her face flushed, her hands twisting in her apron. She saw her daughter. She saw Mrs. Beaumont's pale, frightened face. And she saw Mr. Beaumont. His back was to her, rigid as a steel bar. "Mr. Beaumont, sir?" Martha's voice was breathless. Nicholas turned. His face was devoid of all emotion. "Martha, your services are no longer required." The words just hung in the air. Martha's face went white. Sir, you have been permitted to bring your child onto this property. A clear violation of staff protocol. She has been allowed to disturb my mother. She has, I discover, been here daily. You have been negligent. Your employment is terminated. No, Florence cried out, struggling to rise from her chair. Nicholas, I invited her. I asked her. It doesn't matter, Nicholas said, waving a hand. I am the head of this household. Mr. Hemlock will have your severance pay ready. You and your daughter will be off this property in 1 hour. Martha's eyes filled with tears. She was not just losing a job. She was losing her home. The staff quarters were her apartment. Mr. Beaumont, please. I need this job. I have nowhere. Sophie, what did you do? She whimpered, turning to her daughter. I just read to her, Mama. Sophie cried, running to her mother. He's just mean. He's a mean old man. Be quiet, Sophie. Martha hissed, grabbing her arm. Sir, please, she's just a child. She doesn't understand. I'll make sure she never comes in here again. Please. 1 hour, Nicholas said. He turned and looked at Florence. She had sunk back into her chair, defeated. Her face was a mask of gray despair. The specialist from Switzerland will be here on Thursday to prepare you for the trip, he said, as if nothing had happened. I have handled the distraction. He walked out of the parlor. His shoes clicked. Hard. Fast. Gone. The house went back to the grave. The silence that fell was heavier, colder, and more final than before. Mr. Hemlock, his face tight with grim duty, entered the parlor an hour later. Florence had not moved. She had heard the car. A taxi. She had heard it drive away down the long, gravel path. Sophie was gone. Mr. Beaumont's orders, ma'am, Hemlock said. Florence did not reply. She heard him cross the room. She heard the sound of the curtains being closed. The sound of the motors was the sound of a coffin being sealed. The warmth of the sun was gone. She heard him walk to the piano. He bent down. He lifted the heavy dust cloth. Florence heard the sound of the canvas as he pulled it back over the piano. It was a whoosh, followed by a soft, heavy thump. The piano was suffocated again. It was silent. Will there be anything else, ma'am? No, Mr. Hemlock, she whispered. There will be nothing else. He left. The freesias were removed. The vase was gone. The smell of perfume was gone. The room once again smelled only of lemon oil and the cold, damp salt of the sea. Florence Beaumont was alone. She had been given a light, a small, warm candle, and her son had snuffed it out. The despair that returned was not the slow, creeping fog of before. It was a flood. It was a black, icy ocean, and it pulled her under in an instant. The sickness, which had been held at bay by stories and music, returned with a vengeance. It fed on her grief. She stopped eating. You must, Mrs. Beaumont, Nurse Reyes pleaded. Just a little soup. Florence turned her face away. She stopped speaking. Your son is on the phone, ma'am. He wants to discuss the travel plans. Florence did not move. She sat in her chair, in the dark, silent room. She was a statue of a woman, a memorial to a life that was already over. A week passed. Nicholas called the house every day. Nurse Reyes's reports grew more and more frantic. Sir, her blood pressure is dangerously low. She is unresponsive. She hasn't eaten in 3 days. She refuses to get out of the chair. This is the illness, Nicholas insisted, his voice tight with frustration. It's progressing. That child's therapy was just a distraction. It masked the symptoms. It's a good thing I stopped it. The Swiss clinic is our only option. Sir, I don't think she's strong enough to travel, the nurse said, her voice shaking. I think you should come. Nicholas hung up. He told his pilot to ready the helicopter. He was flying into a storm. The Pacific was raging. Rain and wind lashed the coast. The mansion, a castle of glass, felt as if it were under attack. The windows rattled. The wind howled in the chimneys. And the waves were a roar. The sound of a world ending. Florence sat in her chair. She was so weak. She could barely breathe. The air was too heavy. She was not waiting anymore. She was fading, drifting. This was it. The end. It was not a violent end. It was a surrender. A quiet, giving up. Her head lolled to the side. Her hand, the one that had touched the piano keys, slipped from the arm of the chair. It hung in the air, pale and limp. She heard a sound. A voice. Grandpa Walter? She thought, in a moment of fog. No, not her grandfather. The song remembers Sophie. Sophie. Her name was a single, pain breath. Sophie. And then nothing. The parlor door burst open. It was Nurse Reyes. She had come to check the vitals. She saw the old woman, slumped in gray. She saw the hand, hanging. She ran. She fumbled for the wrist. For a pulse. It was there. But it was a thread. A spider's silk. Code, she screamed into the hall. Code blue. Get the doctor. Now. When Nicholas arrived, the house was chaos. A local doctor, a man on retainer, was working on Florence in her own bed. The parlor had been abandoned. Her room was now a hospital. And 4 was in her arm. An oxygen mask was on her face. A heart monitor beeped, slow and unsteady. What happened? Nicholas demanded. The doctor, a gray-haired man named Miller, turned to him. His face was grim. Her heart is failing, Mr. Beaumont. It's not a medical event in the traditional sense. She's given up. What does that mean? Give her something. Increase the dosage. Of what? Dr. Miller said, exasperated. There is no medicine for a broken will. Her body is shutting down. She's 82. She's fragile. And she has stopped fighting. So what do we do? The doctor sighed, adjusting the oxygen tube. We make her comfortable. I've administered a stimulant. It may give her a few more hours. But, Mr. Beaumont, you need to prepare yourself. She may not survive the night. The words hit Nicholas like a physical force. Survive the night. This was not a negotiation. This was not a spreadsheet. This was an end. He had won the argument. He had closed the curtains. He had fired the maid. And he had killed his mother. The thought was so sharp, so horrifying, he recoiled. No, he said. The Swiss clinic, the specialists. She won't make it to the airfield, the doctor said flatly. I am sorry. I will be in the hall. You should sit with her. The doctor left. Nurse Reyes followed, wringing her hands. Nicholas was alone. He stood by the bed. His mother looked so small. She was a bird. A fallen sparrow. He looked at her face. Pale. Waxy. Her eyes were closed. Her chest barely moved. He had not sat by her side, not truly, in years. He had visited. He had managed. He had arranged. He had not sat. He pulled a chair. It scraped loudly on the hardwood floor. He sat. The guilt and the fear were warring inside him. The guilt was suffocating. The fear was a cold, hard knot. This was his fault. This was his fault. He had taken her one, small light. And he had put it out. Because it wasn't his light. It wasn't his solution. Mother, he whispered. His voice was hoarse. Mother, I'm sorry. She did not stir. The only sounds were the howling wind, the crashing ocean, and the slow, sick beep of the heart monitor. An hour passed. 2. Nicholas just sat. He watched his mother die. The storm raged. And then, a new sound. From downstairs. A banging. Someone was pounding on the heavy oak front door. Nicholas ignored it. It was Hemlock's job. But the banging came again. Louder. More frantic. It was the sound of someone desperate. He heard Hemlock's muffled voice. And then, a different voice. A small one. A high one. A girl's. I have to see her. Please. I know she's sick. I have to see her. Sophie. Nicholas stood. A new kind of anger surged. How dare they? He strode from the room. He was going to have them arrested for trespassing. He reached the top of the grand staircase. Down below, in the marble entryway, Mr. Hemlock was holding the door open, trying to reason with a small, drenched figure. It was Sophie. She was soaked to the skin. Her blonde hair was plastered to her face. She was not wearing a proper coat. Her mother, Martha, stood behind her, crying, holding a broken umbrella. You cannot be here, Hemlock was saying. This is a private. Mrs. Beaumont is very ill. That's why I'm here. Sophie shouted, her voice echoing in the vast hall. She was crying, but her voice was strong. The nurse. I called the nurse's line. I pretended to be from the doctor's office. She told me. She's not waking up. Please. You have to let me in. I will call the police, Nicholas said from the top of the stairs. His voice was a thunderclap. Sophie looked up. She saw him. The tall, dark man. The man who had fired her mother. She did not cower. You, she cried, pointing a small, wet finger. This is your fault. You took her book. You covered her piano. You closed her curtains. Get out, Nicholas ordered. No, I'm not leaving. She needs me. She needs the story. You don't understand. The garden, we didn't finish. She doesn't know if Colin walks. She doesn't know if the garden comes back. You have to let me finish the story. It was the most absurd, insane thing Nicholas had ever heard. A dying woman, a storm, and a child, hysterical about a storybook. Hemlock. Remove them. No. Sophie screamed. She dodged under Hemlock's arm. She was fast. A small, wet rabbit. She ran. She ran for the stairs. Sophie. Martha screamed. Nicholas was so surprised, he didn't move. The 10-year-old girl, soaking wet, her shoes squeaking on the marble, ran right past him at the top of the stairs. She knew the house. She knew where the room was. She ran down the hall and burst into Florence's bedroom. Nicholas ran after her. You child. Get out of here. There are machines. Sophie stopped at the foot of the bed. She saw Florence. The tubes. The mask. The pale, still face. She had never seen death before, but she knew this was close. Her bravery almost failed. She looked small, terrified. Go, Nicholas said, softer this time, grabbing her shoulder. She is resting. You must go. Sophie looked at the hand, the one hanging off the bed, the hand that had played the piano. She pulled a sodden, water-damaged book from inside her thin jacket. The Secret Garden. She walked to the side of the bed. No, Sophie, Nicholas pleaded. Leave her in peace. Sophie ignored him. She took Florence's limp, cold hand. Mrs. Beaumont, she whispered. Her voice was trembling, but she was here. It's me. It's Sophie. I'm sorry I was gone. The monitor beeped. Slow. I brought the book. We were at the best part. Chapter 20. I shall live forever. Nicholas watched. He was frozen. He saw the child take his mother's hand. Sophie opened the book. The pages were warped from the rain. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and she began to read. Nicholas stood in the doorway, a helpless giant. He was trapped between the authority of a lifetime and the raw, unexplainable power of what was happening in front of him. Sophie's voice was the only thing in the room that felt alive. The rain and wind hammered the glass, a furious, primal drumming. The heart monitor beeped its slow, dying rhythm. It was the sweetest, most mysterious-smelling place anyone could imagine, Sophie read. Her voice shook, and she stumbled over the larger words. The pages of the book were damp, and she had to peel them apart. She was reading about the garden, about the gray points of new life pushing up through the black earth. Dr. Miller had returned. He stood in the hall, just outside the door, watching. He had his arms crossed, his face a mask of professional concern. He was ready to step in, to end this childish intrusion. Nicholas watched his mother's face. It was so still, so waxy. Nothing. This is pointless, he whispered to himself. He took a step forward to stop the girl. And then, something changed. The monitor. The space between the beeps was getting shorter. Nicholas stopped. He stared at the small, green line. It was pulsing. Faster. Stronger. Mrs. Beaumont. Sophie whispered, leaning closer. She hadn't noticed the monitor. She had noticed something else. Florence's fingers, the cold, limp ones in her hand, had twitched. She squeezed my hand, Sophie said, her voice rising with a sudden, wild hope. She's unconscious, child, Nicholas said, his own voice harsh with a fear he didn't understand. It's an involuntary reflex. No, Sophie insisted. She squeezed. Mrs. Beaumont, I'm here. It's about the garden. It's not dead. The roses, they're not dead. Sophie, in her excitement, gripped the book tighter and read, her voice suddenly loud and clear, projecting over the storm. And the secret garden bloomed, and every morning revealed new marvels. And Colin stood on his feet. He stood. I shall live forever and ever, he cried. From behind the oxygen mask, a sound. It was a gasp, a dry, rattling intake of air. Florence's head moved on the pillow. Her blind eyes, which had been closed, fluttered. She was fighting. She was trying to speak. Her hand, the one Sophie held, gripped back. It was not a reflex. It was a conscious, desperate grip. Don't stop, Florence whispered. The voice was a papery rustle, barely audible. But it was her. Nicholas's blood went cold. He felt the floor drop out from under him. Sophie was crying, tears of joy streaming down her face, mixing with the rainwater. She's here. She's here. I told you. Florence's lips moved again, her breath fogging the plastic mask. The light? It's coming back. Nicholas watched, his world breaking apart and reforming in a single, agonizing moment. He had offered her the finest science in the world. He had offered her clinics, specialists, and experimental surgeries. He had tried to fix her as if she were a broken asset. This 10-year-old child, with a wet book and a story about a garden, she had reached her. He finally understood. He had been trying to buy her sight. Sophie had given her a reason to see. It wasn't about the eyes. It was about the heart. It wasn't just words. It was love, made audible. Dr. Miller stepped into the room. He was staring at the heart monitor, his jaw slack. The rhythm was steady. Weak, but steady. He looked at Florence. Her vital signs were stabilizing. He looked at the girl. He had no medical chart for this. There was no pill, no procedure, that could do what this child had just done. He looked at Nicholas. He gave a single, baffled shake of his head. And then, he did something no doctor would normally do. He backed quietly out of the room. He motioned to the nurse. He let the treatment continue. Sophie did not leave. She sat on that chair for hours. Martha was brought in, wrapped in a warm blanket, and sat in a corner, weeping silently. Sophie read. She finished The Secret Garden. She read until her voice was hoarse. Nicholas stood by the window. The storm outside was breaking. The howling wind was quieting to a whisper. The rain was stopping. He just listened. He listened to the story of a locked-up place, and a broken boy, and the stubborn girl who believed in it. He listened to the words. He listened to the sound of his mother's breathing, which was no longer a death rattle, but the shallow, even breath of sleep. He had handled the distraction. He had almost destroyed his mother. He saw the child, Sophie, with her blonde hair, now drying in damp curls. She looked exhausted, but she kept reading. Grandpa Walter, a war veteran. He had taught her this resilience, this strange, unchildlike wisdom. She sees what other people miss. He had missed everything. As dawn broke, a pale, watery gray light filled the room. Sophie had finally fallen asleep. Her head was pillowed on the edge of her mother's lap, the book still open on the floor. Florence was breathing. The oxygen mask was still on, but she was breathing. Nicholas had not moved all night. He was a statue of guilt. He heard a small sound, a stirring. He looked at the bed. Florence's head was turned toward him. Her eyes were open. They were milky, unseeing, but they were aware. He walked to the bed. Mother. She raised a weak hand, fumbling for the mask. Take off. His hands, which could sign billion-dollar deals without a tremor, were shaking. He gently lifted the plastic from her face. She took a deep, rattling breath of the room's air. It was quiet. The monitor just beeped its steady, quiet rhythm. Sophie and Martha were asleep. Nicholas thought she would speak to him, that she would rage at him, that she would forgive him. He was ready for either, but she did not. She turned her head, her ears searching. Sophie, she whispered. Her voice was a cracked reed. In the corner, the child's head shot up. I'm here. Sophie scrambled off her mother's lap and ran to the bedside. Florence's hand found the girl's. You came back, Florence whispered. I had to, Sophie said, her eyes wide. The garden. I had to tell you. Florence smiled. It was the first true smile Nicholas had seen on her face in a decade. It was weak, but it was radiant. It lit up her ruined face. You did it, Sophie. She turned her face toward Nicholas, though she could not see him. Did you hear, Nicholas? She did it. I heard, Mother. Florence turned back to Sophie. Her voice was frail, but it held a new, unshakable strength. You helped me see again, she whispered, squeezing the child's hand. Not with my eyes. With my heart. Nicholas Beaumont finally broke. He did not make a sound, but he turned his back to the bed, faced the window, and a single, hot tear, the first in 30 years, cut a path down his cheek. He had been so wrong. So profoundly, arrogantly, and dangerously wrong. He let the moment hold. The old woman. The child. The dawn. Then, he composed himself. He wiped his face. He was still Nicholas Beaumont. He had made a catastrophic error. Now he would fix it. He walked over to Martha, who was now awake, watching in stunned, tearful silence. He stood before her. She flinched, expecting what? For him to throw them out again? Martha, he said. His voice was quiet. Formal. Sir, my mother will require constant companionship. Nurse Reyes is a medical professional. This is different. He was fumbling. He, the man of 1,000 boardrooms, did not have the words. You and Sophie will be staying, he said. Your old rooms are not adequate. I will have Hemlock prepare the guest wing for you. Martha's jaw dropped. Sir? The guest wing. And your employment? It is reinstated. With a promotion, you will no longer be on the housekeeping staff. You will be Mrs. Beaumont's personal companion. Your salary will be tripled. Your duties will be whatever my mother requires. He looked at Sophie. And her duty, he said, nodding to the child, is to read and to play the piano. It was not an apology. It was a surrender. It was the only way a man like Nicholas knew how to say, I was wrong. Thank you. Please, stay. Martha just nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Nicholas nodded. He turned and left the room. He had to go outside. He had to feel the cold, clean air of the storm that had passed. He had to stand on the cliff and listen to the waves. The sound was the same. The crashing, the roaring. But for the first time in his life, it didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like a beginning. Florence recovered slowly. Her blindness was unchanged. Her body was still frail. But her spirit, the part that had nearly died, was renewed. The mansion on the cliff was no longer a tomb. It was a home. The heavy curtains in the parlor stayed open. The piano was never covered again. Nicholas was different. He visited, not out of duty, but out of a new, awkward desire to connect. He stopped trying to fix his mother. He started, simply, to listen to her. He learned the names of the staff. He learned Martha's story. He asked Sophie about Grandpa Walter, the war veteran, whose simple wisdom had seen what his own billion-dollar vision had missed. Weeks later, Florence sat in the parlor, the sun warm on her face. I want to build something, she told Nicholas. Not with glass and steel. With books. He understood. He did not offer a clinic or a new technology. The Light Within Foundation was born. It was a program dedicated to children's literacy, to funding libraries in forgotten neighborhoods, to bringing stories to those trapped in their own kind of darkness. At the opening ceremony, Nicholas stood at the podium. He did not talk about assets or returns. He talked about a small, wet girl who had faced down a storm because she knew a story had to be finished. He brought Martha and Sophie to the stage. He did not call them servants. He called them his mother's dearest companions. He called them family. The house was quiet now, in a different way. It was not the silence of a grave. It was the silence of peace. Florence was in her chair again, by the same window, overlooking the same ocean. The same chair, the same view she could not see. But this time, her face was turned toward the light. Her eyes were closed. She was smiling. Beside her, Sophie, now 11, read from another story. Her voice was clear and steady. The waves crashed against the cliffs far below. The lights in the house stayed on, bright and warm, through the entire night. Because sometimes the brightest light doesn't come from what we see, but from what we hear and who we finally, truly, choose to listen to. And that is where Florence and Sophie's story closes for now. I hope this story gave you a chance to step out of the noise and just listen. I'd love to know where this story found you. Perhaps sitting by a window as the day ended, sharing a quiet moment, or just settling in for the evening. Drop a line in the comments. I truly do read them all. And if you want to make sure we find each other again in the dark, hitting that like button and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to make our stories brighter, so your feedback is invaluable. Thank you for listening with me.